And he knows us. And he's our Father. He's the God of all creation, but he's our Father. You know, it's good to know the Lord. I was meditating on the word yesterday, thinking about the heart. And then I was also thinking about a little uh, lecture I went to with one of the young children here in the ministry. And we went to go see a man who is a psychologist. He's very popular. He likes to study the mind. And I talked to the young man that was with me, and I said, I commend him because he's trying to do something that even God himself isn't trying to do. So he's trying to clean up flesh. I said, that's going to kill him, but I commend him for trying. But as we were sitting in the lecture, it turned out that this psychologist was very popular, who has a big following online. I actually have listened to a few of him speak. He has about 5 million followers. But his lecture, we always say people like to stay in their lane, stay in your own lane. Well, he crossed over into another lane. He tried to cross over into our lane. Yes, because he was speaking on Abraham. And he was ministering. So I'd say that I was surprised. My ears perked up because I seen Genesis 12 and Genesis 14. He was speaking on Abraham. But the natural mind can't understand the things of God. So as soon as he started off, I knew he was off. Because he said, the first thing he went to talk about was Abraham was, he was speaking in Genesis 12. And he said, God, as for the Lord had said to Abraham, get thee out of thy father's house. And he went on to say, well, Abraham had an issue. He suffered from infantilism. I said, what? And he said, basically, infantilism is when there's an adult who has some childish ways. And he said Abraham had a failure to launch. He was 75 years old, still in his parents' home. And I said, he doesn't know. I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I understood. We give grace because he didn't know. Because he didn't understand that even at that verse, it said the Lord had said. And Abraham had already responded to that. He appeared to Abraham when he was in Ur. Chapter 12, Abraham was in Haran. And then what he didn't know is that when he appeared to Abraham at Ur, it said Abraham believed God and it was counted unto God for righteousness. Well, what he didn't understand was that even though Abraham had to go to Haran and stay there with his father, Terah, whose name means delay, Abraham was already gone. Abraham left when God first appeared to him because it was his heart. Abraham, as it says, he obeyed from the heart. And God deals with our hearts. So, as I was meditating on that and I heard, Brother Desiree speaking about the heart, I started meditating on the heart because I said, well, Abraham left. He followed the Lord as soon as he said it. He obeyed from the heart. And as I was studying the scriptures, I realized that, we understand that our relationship with God is held by God. We have a relationship with him, and that's held by him. That's permanent. But our fellowship with the Lord is something that can change. And the condition of our heart determines the type of fellowship we have with the Lord. And then the one thing I was studying as I was looking through the book of Luke. I don't know where the Lord had me in Luke. And one thing I noticed in Luke is Luke focuses a lot on distance. You'll see a lot of times it says far off or near. He was afar off. The Queen of Sheba came from a faraway country. It always speaks of distance. in our heart. I was examining myself to say, Lord, do I know the distance of my heart to you? Is my heart coming or is my heart going? Because we need to have this understanding on what is our distance of our heart. Because when we can find that distance out, we can know the type of fellowship we have with the Lord. So, as I was looking, as I said, as I seen with Abraham, I seen that he believed and obeyed from the heart. So he was gone already. Even when he was in Haran, I can tell that he probably was there and he didn't care what was going on because he wasn't there because his heart had already left. And that's in the positive. And I was thinking of myself. I said, now, have my heart already left this world? Is my heart in the promised land or the kingdom? Because we know the scripture says where your treasure is, there's your what? Heart. So my treasures, we have rewards in the kingdom. But we have Christ as our reward. So is our heart there already? Because when we know where our heart is in the positive, things here won't bother us that much. Because you're just like, I'm not even here anymore. But also in the negative, we can draw away in our hearts and not even be aware of it. You know, I kind of was, when I was meditating on it, I was thinking to, a time in my life where I was heartbroken. I was separated. Yeah, from my wife. But she was my girlfriend at the time, and I'm acting the fool. I was acting the fool, y'all. And she said, I ain't dealing with this. You go your way, I'll go my way. But me and my self didn't realize, though, that my heart still, my heart was still for her. But what I tried to do, in my pride, I don't need her. I'll go find some other company. But what I didn't know was that when I went and found some other company, I heard a singer once say, he said, you never know true loneliness until you're next to somebody and you still feel alone. And that's what I felt. I went and found some other company, but I felt alone because my heart was somewhere else. And we have to learn this with the Lord. So as I was looking in Luke, I can see that we need to see how distant our hearts are. Because things will draw our heart away, some distance. And so I just was using some stories and things that I was looking at in Luke. Let's start off at Luke chapter 15. And I was, using these as applications. That we'll see that things will draw our heart away. So we know we're all familiar with the parable of the lost son. I'm going to start from Luke 15, verse 11. And I want to show us, as we go through some scriptures, of what can cause us to go, our hearts to go far away. First, we look at Luke 15, verse 11, and I'll read. And it says, and he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto him his living. Verse 13, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country. Say a far country. So that shows some far distance. And there wasted his substance with riotous living. So we see with the prodigal son that they speak of, the son was always in relation to the father. But his fellowship wasn't right because he took what he had and went to a far distance. And when I was looking at this, I said he went there to waste his substance and go act, with riotous living. And when I thought about myself and things, I was like, whenever I wanted to go and, do some riotous living, what is the first thing I have to do? I go take a vacation. I go somewhere far. I get from where people who can hold me accountable, I get as far away from them. And what can happen with us in our hearts can be drawn away by the things of this world. Brother Desiree was speaking about the 4 grounds of the heart. And we know the last ground, the thorny ground, which the word is choked by, are the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. We can get the things that we can see in the world, we can get a desire towards it, and that can pull our hearts away. And what happens is that takes us away and puts us out of proper fellowship with the Lord. And so we need to understand, well, am I being drawn away by these things that I'm doing? It says in Mark 7, I believe verse 6, when Jesus quoted, he says that people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away. So we need to know, well, is our heart being drawn away by the cares of this world, by us wanting to go see what we're missing out on? Because those are things that gets us to move a little bit further back. And we can see the things that affects us. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 33. If you will, please go with me. And we can see another meaning of that. Let's look at verse 31. It says, "And they come unto thee as the people cometh, and they sit before thee as my people, and they hear thy words, but they will not do them. For with a mouth they show much love, but their heart goeth after their covetousness." So I was examining myself to understand that, is my heart coming or is my heart going? Are there things that will draw my heart away from proper fellowship with the Lord? What can be covetous to us that can draw us away? We can even go back to the story of our father Abraham. We can see that he was so, and this is how tricky it can get, he was so wanting to have the promise fulfilled of having a son that he went after the ways of the flesh and produced the Ishmael. And he didn't realize that his heart went towards Ishmael, and that you'll see that for 13 years, God didn't see nothing to him. It goes from when Ishmael was born to Ishmael was 13. There's nothing spoken of that time in between. Because when you examine it, his heart was towards his son Ishmael, which was of the flesh, and he didn't know it drew him away from God. And we have little things that can cause us to draw our hearts away from God. Even our families, even our loved ones, our jobs. And we can see that it may slowly but surely be drawing us away. Now, the thing about the heart is the heart goes way before our feet. And I was, it's been said, and I've seen it myself, where you'll see where people, as they say, you can tell where people are going because they start sitting further and further back in the pews. They start off in the front and they end up in the back. Well, I'm here to put before you that even before they get to the back, their heart already went out the door. So we need to ask the Lord to help us discern whether our hearts are coming or our hearts are going. Now, the other issue is that we know the prodigal son was stuck out there. Thank God that he has a spirit that is with us that can enlighten us. But the issue is now, it's easy to go, but there's some issues there is to come. Because even though we want to come, the one thing I have noticed is that you'll see when people when their heart is gone, they'll go further back and back in the pews. But when they're coming back, they start from the back and start to move forward. But that's when I started looking. Let's look back in Luke. Let's go to Luke 18, because I want to get these people. You don't have to start so far back. So what we see we need to do. Let's look in Luke chapter, if you will, please go with me to Luke chapter 17. And let's look at verse 12. Let's start at verse 11. Luke 17, verse 11, and reading on through 12 and 13. And it came to pass, as he went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And as he entered into a certain village, there met him 10 men that were lepers, which stood, say with me, afar off. So now we see now that they understand their condition, and their hearts are a little bit far off. And he says, and they lifted up their voice and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So what I've noticed also is that even though our hearts may put us at a distance, we have an issue now. When we awaken, we see there's distance, and we need to figure out how to make up this distance. Well, one of the ways that we have to do, we can see from these lepers who were contaminated, and people who, the brethren who sometimes I myself has been as that, is when you feel contaminated, you feel wrong, you don't want to, you stand afar off. You don't want to come close. And so one of the things that we can do is what they did, is lift up their voice. Have for mercy. Cry out. The farther your heart feels, the louder you should cry out for mercy. That rejoice against judgment. To deal with it. To help us come closer. Then we see in Luke 18, the next chapter. Luke 18. And we see that the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, will jump down to verse 13. And it says, and the publican standing what? Afar off. There's a fellowship issue. His heart is distance. We got to make up that distance. Would not lift so much his eyes to heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. We see there's that purpose of calling out, of being willing to cry out to the Lord so that that distance can be covered. Because what will happen is, I noticed that I've seen in my time of different ministries, and there's ministries of people who have ended up in the back door and left. But then they have ended up coming back, but they're in the back pews. And if you don't know how to get closer, if you're not crying out, you might turn right back around because it's hard. You know, we end up with they're trying to connect, but they don't know how to close that distance. And I'm asking the Lord, how can we close the distance? You know, even when we look at Peter in the same book of Luke, let's go to Luke chapter 22. You see this issue. Luke chapter 22. And we can go to verse 54. Now, we know that Luke had what Luke has done, and his heart is being messed up. But in 54 it says, then took they him and led him and brought him into the high priest house. And Peter followed, what's that word? Afar off. Something happened in his heart. There was some fear there. And now he's following at a distance. Now people are asking him about who he serves, and he's denying it. There's a heart issue. And he doesn't know how to close this distance. And we can look at the story of Peter, because after everything happened, Peter was defeated. He went, he stopped following. I'm going back to my old ways, because he couldn't get that distance met. And I'm asking the Lord, first show me, is my heart coming or going? But we know that there's a call from the Lord to always come. Matthew 11, come unto me that are heavy, ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Now that's a call. So we have to heed that call and draw near. So we look in James. I was looking in James which gives us what to do, but even this still left me with a problem. Let's go to James chapter 4, if you will. James chapter 4, look at my time. James chapter 4 and verse 8. Now this is, notice now we're coming. And James tells us, draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. So we got to draw near. Now this gave me some hope, but then I'm listening, well, how? How can I cleanse this? How can I draw near to God? He still seems far. Now I want to come close, but I still see myself afar off. So how can I close this distance? And then the Lord helps us. And the answer is, the one thing I've learned about the Lord is whatever he tells us to do, he has already done. See, Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father doing. So that's why I realized that's where that saying comes, like father, like son. And what God is, God will not require us to do anything that he himself hasn't already done. God told us to be humble. Nobody humbled themselves more than God. He humbled himself as low as he can go to a baby, a human baby. So whatever he tells us to do, he has already done for us. So when God tells us to draw nigh, and I'm like, how do I draw nigh to God? Well, we can draw nigh to God because he has already made us close to him. If you will, please go with me to Ephesians chapter 2. And he shows us how he's made us. And this is going to be the answer to how we cover the distance. It says, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 13, it says, but now in Christ Jesus, ye who were sometimes, what's that word says? Far off, are made nigh by the blood of Christ. So now I can draw near because he's already made me close to him. So he only wants us to do what he has already done. God has already done. And then he gave us the answer. He said, I can cover the distance. I can make up the distance because I already has been as far as possible from myself. When Christ was on that cross, if you look in Psalms chapter 22, he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why hast thou so far from helping me? Christ was made sin, so God had to break fellowship with him. And that was the farthest anybody could be from God. But he has already done it for us because his blood has made us close. So now we can draw near to God with true hearts and full assurance of faith. By the blood of Jesus Christ, the blood of Christ has covered the distance for us. So now that when we feel afar off, it don't matter how far we go because the blood brings us close wherever we are. So we just have to come knowing that because we don't have to worry about us meeting God. He has already come to meet us. Even if we go back to Luke 15 and we see this, the Son, and let's go to with me. 20. And we see the Son. His mind is awakened and he's drawing back and he says, I need to go back. And he's coming, but I can see himself trying to work. Well, I'm going to try to become a servant. I'm trying to find a way to work close to him. But in verse 20, it says, and he arose and came to his father. But when he was a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion on him and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. The father made up the distance. The father has always made up the distance from us. We can come close to the father because the father has become close to us. He's not going to require us to do anything that he himself hasn't already done. We can cry out to the father because the father has first cried out to us. In Proverbs chapter 1, it speaks of wisdom doing what? crying out in the streets, lifting her voice up. Well, if we know Christ is the wisdom of God. So what God has already done, we can do. If we're far off, cry out because he's already cried out to us. Draw near because he has already drawn near to us. Think of that blood because the blood has covered the distance. It's the blood that has made us close. So it doesn't matter how far you are. It doesn't matter how much sin is because the blood of Christ is greater than any sin. So we can know that the distance of our heart can always be close to God. So whether you're coming, whether you feel like your heart is coming or whether you feel like your heart is going, just know that the blood has already made you close and near to God. So that's my prayer for everyone in here today.